Recently, I was invited to give a poetry workshop on a reflection day at a local school. They wanted the writing element of the day to help students understand themselves better, so I chose to provide a workshop based on George L. Lyon's poem, Where I'm From. If you've been around for long, you know I love that workshop. Together, we looked at how details bring poetry to life. We brainstormed images about their childhood experiences. We explored how various creators have interpreted the I am from prompt to create videos, paintings, photo essays, poems, and combinations of all of the above. Then I invited them to work multimodally as they knit together their images with color and visuals. But I had never worked with these students before, and none of them had heard of multimodal communication, though they are surrounded with it every day. I realized I had left out a crucial step in the workshop to help them see that multimodal communication could go well beyond just decorating their poem or underlining lines of their poem in different colors. So, how can we introduce this concept to students? How can we help them see that text, images, audio, and video can all convey such very different shades of meaning and combination? This week on the pod, let's talk about introducing multimodality next year and showing kids what works and what doesn't. Be sure to grab the free download that goes along with this episode, a slideshow full of examples you can share with your students. I'll be referring to it in the show today, but it will really help if you can see it for yourself and grab it so your students can see it for themselves. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more creativity, more engagement, more joy. And no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. As I thought about how to help kids see how you can communicate about one thing in many different ways, I wanted to choose a simple example to begin with. For example, in sharing about a bird, what could different modes offer? Students might share a written image of a bird and express a lot, right? You can write a lot of different details about a bird, and you can give your reader a really good impression of what that bird might be like. But how might a painting of the bird, or a mural, or a couple of photographs, or maybe even a cartoon of a bird add another dimension to their impression of the bird? How could audio add another way to help understand the bird? You might hear what the bird sounds like when it's taking off from a tree that's covered in snow, or you might hear a bird singing, or you might hear a bird conversation with another bird. These things would add a layer of your understanding about the bird. What could be expressed with a short video that would add yet another layer? What if you saw the bird as part of a flock of 1 million birds as they made shapes in the sky? What if you saw a bird putting a worm into the mouth of its baby? How would those add to your understanding of the bird? How might this bird live for your audience through combinations of these modes? So that was my foundation to build on. I started with this place of the bird. How can you represent the bird across all these different modes of communication in ways that each bring their own inherent meaning to the table? And then next, I wanted to walk students through some models of what a piece might look like with just text, what it might look like if it had text that was sort of weakly illustrated by images that weren't really providing new layers of meaning, and then what it might look like with real multimodal layers where each piece was telling part of the story in its own way, bringing unique layers of meaning to the overall piece. And so I ran through some examples and slides from projects that I really love. Now, you can use my exact models if these are projects you love too. You could also add in slides that have models for the kinds of projects that you like to do. So you're setting students up specifically for success in those areas. But I think whether you use sort of general possibilities and not tailor it exactly to what projects you'll be doing in class, or whether you use your own projects, it doesn't matter so much. The idea is really to get this thought across that all the modes bring something unique, and that there are some pitfalls you can fall into with multimodal communication if you don't remember that. So what I did was I created 3 slides to look at these 3 projects. The I Am From poem represented multimodally, an open mind project represented multimodally, and a digital blackout poem represented multimodally. And over on the left, I started with just a text version of the project. What would this project be like with just text, right? Okay, it can be good that way. Then in the middle, I considered, what if you are trying to communicate multimodally, but you don't go very deep with it? So for example, in my I Am From poem, the text part is about this experience of being out at dawn on a lake, canoeing, and then eating this bagel breakfast with my dad in our campsite. And so in the middle, for my kind of like weaker multimodal piece, I just image searched in Canva canoe paddles and bagels, because those are words in the poem. And then I sort of faded them and stuck them behind the text. So you read the poem, you have this experience of being out at dawn on the lake, and then you see these canoe paddles and bagel. And it's, it's not really compelling. And then in the third column, I show what it might be like to try to tell this story in a brighter way, with more multimodal layers that were truly meaningful. And it starts with a video of somebody canoeing across a lake at dawn and the mist rising off the lake. And there's a voiceover with the text of the poem. So, theoretically, I would be reading this poem out loud. You would be hearing it as you're watching the person canoe across the lake. And then very subtly under my voice, the idea was to do an overlay sound of wind and loons. So as you're kind of being taken into the introduction of the poem, you hear the words of the poem, you see the person canoeing with the mist at dawn, you hear the sound of the wind, you hear the sound of the loons, and then in the next part, there's kind of this oil pastel illustration I made of the feeling of the canoe sliding between ripples on the lake as the sun is rising, and it shows another line of the poem overlaid over that oil pastel piece. So this is a little bit different take on the poem. Now we're using a lot of different modes to try to convey meaning, and they're all woven together. And I'm not at all trying to say it's like a perfect, incredible multimodal piece, but the idea is each mode is bringing something to the table. It's adding shades of meaning. It's not just sort of a extremely general illustration of the words. Now I ran through these kind of 3 iterations for the other 2 projects too. The Open Mind project and the multimodal blackout poetry piece, but I'll let you see them for yourself in the slideshow or go to the full blog post and let me walk you through what I did with them. But the idea is you show students this kind of contrasting set of 3 for some different projects, and you let them really take in the difference between generalized illustration across modes and really weaving together modes to create meaning. That was the main thing. I want them to know that each mode is contributing something unique, and that a Google image search is not enough to make a piece multimodal. Finally, after you show this slideshow, when you're doing this kind of multimodal introduction lesson, I'm going to suggest you check out the New York Times piece with your students called Avalanche at Snow Creek. I first learned about it in the book Creating Confident Writers. I was grateful to the authors for bringing it to my attention. It is a really cool multimodal piece. And what I would suggest is you let students explore it a little bit. Put them in small groups, let them click around, let them see the videos, the maps, the photo carousels, the textual description, and then ask them to consider how the different pieces are contributing. Why is that weather map there? What does it add? Why is there a link right there that jumps out to that photo carousel? What does that add? Invite them to consider how all of these multimodal elements weave together and amplify their understanding of what's going on and amplify their interest in what's going on. And this is like just kind of a culminating mentor text here, right? To really show them there's so much more than just dropping a picture on top of some text to create a multimodal piece. Okay, my friend, I hope you're going to use this lesson next year before one of your multimodal projects. I think it can really help students to see all of the potential in the multimodal palette instead of just kind of glossing over it. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.